Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Leonie White, clinical family therapist and psychologist, and I'm making this clip today to talk to you about the parenting iceberg. So, what's the parenting iceberg and why do you need to know about it? Wow, this is a really fantastic concept for helping you grow great kids. It's going to help you understand their big behaviors and emotions and how to support them with those. So, let's get started. First of all, I want to let you know that while I made this clip primarily thinking about parents and carers, when we're thinking about challenging behaviors and big emotions, that information is important for anyone who has children in their lives or who works with kids. So, the parenting iceberg, what is it? Why do we need it? One of the things that often comes up in my practice when I'm working with parents and carers is the problem that traditional behavior management just isn't working. Sometimes it works really well. Sometimes the way we were parented works really good with the parenting that we provide. But sometimes it just doesn't work. And that's because in some situations, there's a lot more going on. There's more to it. So when we're approaching supporting positive behavior and managing challenging behavior, we often do that with what we might call common but misguided attempted solutions. And I'm going to say these are rewards and consequences. Now, remember, sometimes it works. Sometimes those traditional common sense approaches really work, but sometimes they don't. And when they're not working, that's because they're common sense, but they're misguided because they're responding to the behavior that we see in the moment or what's at the top of the iceberg that you can see, but they're really not tackling what's underneath the problem. So if there's an unmet need for your child that's underneath the iceberg, and your reward or your consequence is targeting just the top part of the iceberg, you're going to end up frustrated because it's probably not going to work. Your kids are going to end up frustrated because they're not going to feel that you're understanding them or appreciating what's going on for them. And the problem could get worse, the behavior could escalate, and there can also be an increase in tensions in your relationship. Think of it this way. Here's just a very basic example. So imagine your child comes home from school and you have a particular place where you expect them to put their school bag and unpack. So we'll start at the top left-hand corner. So your child doesn't follow your instructions with putting the bag where it's meant to go. And let's say this has happened a few times. And so you then come in and you give a consequence. So you threaten to remove, for example, that's it, no screen time this afternoon. Now, what you don't know, what I've got here inside the circle, is that maybe they had a really rough day at school. Maybe something happened in the classroom. They didn't get their work finished. Maybe the teacher kept them in for a little bit, so they missed some eating time. They could be hungry or hungry. Maybe they're really disappointed because they missed out on playtime. That was really important to them. Okay, so let's step back outside the circle and we're going down to the dark green arrow. So in this situation, then you've provided a consequence. That's it. We're going to remove your screen time this afternoon. And so your child won't understand what's going on there. They could feel really harshly treated. They could feel misunderstood. They're probably still preoccupied with what was happening in their day. And so in that situation, their behavior could even escalate. And then as we move around the circle, as their behavior escalates, you have to do something about that as a parent or carer. You do need to help the children to not be out of control. That's not good for anyone. And so traditionally, we would respond with more consequences or probably an offer of a reward. But remember, that's still above the iceberg. It's not tapping into what's actually happening underneath. And so this is how we can end up caught in vicious cycles of trying to manage behaviors, but actually just getting really stuck. So the parenting iceberg, I really wanted to talk to you about this because when we respond purely behaviorally, it can come at a cost, even when it looks like it's working. One of the metaphors that a mentor of mine shared with me is you may win the battle, but you're going to lose the war. And that war is the overall development of your young person and your relationship with them, and maintaining that positive connection. So there can be a relationship impact of being purely behavioral. It can also impact your child's sense of self, how they feel about themselves, their self-concept, etc. And you can also end up with these displaced behaviours. And by this I mean, if we move to the picture in the middle, say you have set a consequence, just thinking about the behaviour, not what's going on under the iceberg, and your child feels really misunderstood and angry, but in that moment they give in and you remove the iPad, for example. They still have that feeling inside, and that goes on with them, and then can become displaced onto the family pet, a sibling, a peer, maybe in more extreme situations, a punch on the wall. So the actual problem's not getting solved, and those difficult feelings are just getting moved around. So to make sense of supporting behavior, I'm going to go back to one of my all-time favorite family therapy concepts. We're going to look at the both and, okay, which is different from either or. We're going to appreciate that there are two parts. And those two parts are definitely supporting behavior. We do need to respond to behavior. But also, we have to make sure that we're working to understand the behavior so that we can look at making changes and adapting things to overall reduce the amount of behavior and support our kids in their development. So what matters is the both and. It's how you combine supporting behavior with understanding behavior. And then I will always say it's really critical also to look after yourself while you're doing this, because it's tough work to be responding in the moment, thinking about what's going on and how can you support them and shape things. So you really are critical in this. Okay, just a little bit deeper dive into this. So when we're doing the both and of the parent iceberg in terms of parenting, we're both responding to behavior and working towards understanding the behavior. So a couple of key concepts here is knowing that all behavior is communication. Even when they're giving you the silent treatment, that's communicating something. So that slamming of the door, the storming off, the whining, those behaviors are all communicating something that's underneath the iceberg. The trick is to work out what it's communicating, what is under the iceberg at that time for that child. So the iceberg, you can see then, is really helpful to think about what's underneath. Are they tired? Are they hungry? Something going on with their sensory needs? Where are they at in their development? How's their central nervous system at this time? Are they really activated and need some soothing? And that's particularly important to remember because you just can't reason with an emotional brain. So you can't try to apply a logical consequence when the thinking part of the brain isn't engaged. Now, just a quick note on the other both ends that I talk about in the parenting sandwich. And I really encourage you to check out this YouTube clip as well. I've said that it's important that we do respond to and support positive behavior. And if you're after some ideas about how to do this in the moment, I really encourage you to look at the clip. What we're thinking about here is that there's a sandwich filling, which is the behavior support, but the sandwich is held together by the bread on each side, right? And so that's your relationship connection. And so the both end of the parenting sandwich is to be connected in relationship as well as manage behavior. You do need a pickle on top, and that pickle on top again is you, and that's looking after you and checking in first with yourself to make sure that you're in the right space to be really present and connect in relationship with your child in order to then support the positive behavior, or you might say manage the behavior, and then reconnect through that process as well so that they know that you love them and that your relationship is bigger than what's happened. But let's get back to the iceberg. Now, just to be really clear, the iceberg model was saying what you can see is above the waterline, and that's whether it's whining, yelling, refusing to do something, etc. What you can't see is what's under the waterline. And those might be things like basic needs. Are they tired, hungry? It could be where are they at in their social emotional development, or it could be something like their sensory needs or sensory overload. When we think about behavior, what we can see and what's above the waterline, what's below the waterline, I really love this definition from Mona Delahoob. And so here we're saying that behavior is the observable response to our internal and external experiences. Okay, so behavior is what we see. This broad definition suggests that behaviors are outward manifestations of a person's internal bodily processes, perceptions. So it's how people process information from the environment, their emotions, thoughts, and intentions. Too often, though, we build recommendations, treatment plans in my line of work, and techniques based on what we see. So we try to manage behavior based on that bit above the waterline. And we're not always considering what's below the waterline, what's really driving what we're looking at. So a couple of key areas I want to get you to think about in terms of underneath the iceberg and what's driving that. And the first one is social emotional development. So in my practice, I often see people who aren't having a really accurate understanding of where their kids are at developmentally and what can be expected. Each child will have individual differences, but often people are overestimating a child's capacity. They might see that at times kids can do things, can manage themselves, can problem solve, can do chores, and then say, well, why can't they do it all the time? And that's what happens with kids. There'll be times when they can do it and times when they can't. There'll be times where they may have really big strengths in some areas and have other things that you think, well, they should be able to do this if they can do that, but they just can't, and that's normal development. In terms of brain development, I really encourage you to find some great resources looking at emotional regulation and also language and communication. Language and communication are so critical in terms of developing an understanding and ability to communicate their inner experience and to be able to solve problems. And without language and communication, or if that's a little bit further down and not quite as developed, you're going to see your kids communicate in other ways, like with their hands and feet sometimes. So a speech pathologist is a great professional resource if you're worried about communication development and want to find out a bit more. Now, remember, a child's capacity reduces when they're distressed. So wherever they're at in terms of their social emotional development, if they're hungry, tired, had a rough day, really stressed or upset, wherever they are, they're going to drop back a couple notches. So, it's really important to think about where they're at in the moment. And we often talk about the downstairs emotional brain and how it can take over from the smart thinking upstairs part of the brain. So you've got to think about which part of the brain is in charge at the moment and what's their actual capacity. So then, from this perspective, we're thinking, well, what's the behavior communicating? And it could be communicating to you an area in need of development in terms of their emotions, their relational skills, their communication. Or if you've got a teenager, we know that the teenage brain literally shuts down for renovations for a couple of years. That could be the explanation for what's going on in terms of brain development and regulation and communication. The next area that comes up a lot in the work that I do is sensory needs. So most people don't understand that we have a range of senses and that all of us have different individual preferences for whether something is over or understimulating or just right. And so if we think about behavior, and we think all behaviors are adaptive and useful, this might help you make sense of some of the kind of odd or difficult things that you might experience. So some behaviors will be soothing and calming. That might be anything from a humming noise to fidgeting to sort of rocking. And so those behaviors might seem really irritating or distracting, but thinking about the purpose of those behaviors can be helpful. Other behaviors might be more alerting, more helping kids concentrate. For example, if kids have a high need for movement, they might be the little ones that benefit most from sitting on a wobble chair in class while they're doing their handwriting. So understanding what sensory needs are, what is too much, too little, or just right, and what helps kids to do well in different situations is a really important skill. Now, an occupational therapist is a fantastic professional resource in this area. Sometimes as well, in terms of thinking about what the behavior is communicating, it's not just the overall understimulation, but it could be overall what we call a sensory diet. So in the same way that when we think about food as a diet and having a healthy range of foods, all of our senses need to be considered. So a sensory diet is, for example, how much movement is someone getting? How much kind of pressure is someone getting? And you might have seen getting around the shops now or advertised on social media, things like weighted blankets or toys. That can be a really great resource there. Now, the third point that I want to make about what's under the waterline is this concept called neuroception. And it's a big word, it's a word you might not have heard before, but it refers to a process in our bodies, in our brains and central nervous system, where our brains are wired for a prime directive of survival. And there's an older neural pathway that detects threat or danger, literally at light speed, even before our brain is consciously aware of it. So if you, for example, like bushwalking, you might have experienced this when you're walking along the path and you see something that looks like a snake, and you might automatically freeze or jump sideways. And then thinking party brain kicks in, and you think, oh my gosh, that's a snake. And then you look at it more closely and you go, oh, it's just a stick. But that moment, that instantaneous recognition of danger and survival response, that's your neuroception. Now, your kids will have that as well. And sometimes it will be the neuroception and the perception of danger that's kicking in. And it's not an intentional behavior. They're not intentionally being difficult or manipulative. They may just have had that neuroception of threat or distress. Now, this can happen sometimes. Little people, their brains are just more wired to be more sensitive to danger. Definitely young people I see who've experienced trauma are more sensitive to perceptions of danger. And we sometimes refer to this as faulty neuroception, because they're sensing danger when there actually is no danger. And then it gets them into a bit of a pickle because they can respond with some difficult behaviors that you then have to respond to, and you can get stuck in that cycle. So it's really very important to understand just how critical relational safety is. So your relationship, your connection, how present you are, that's what's going to make the difference if faulty neuroception is at play. And in this instance, then, when we think about what the behavior is communicating, if it's communicating that the child doesn't feel safe, that's the neuroception of danger. Now, you might think, that's just ridiculous. They are so safe with me. I don't, this doesn't make any sense. Just remember that this is coming from an older part of the brain that's just wired for survival. And sometimes it doesn't make sense, but it's the child's experience. And so when they have that experience and you can remain calm and present and not become reactive to them, you're really going to help support their central nervous system to become more soothed. So here's the thing. When we're trying to access what's under the waterline and work this out, it is not easy. And you have to become like an investigator or a private detective. So you do have to work at developing your understanding of your child. You do have to work at developing your ability to read their cues in the moment. And this is tricky. So again, I just want to say it's really important to be kind and compassionate to yourself while you're learning this. We do need to also remember that every single child is unique. in everything from their temperament, their mind, body, brain, the way they think, their senses, emotions, their needs, their preferences, and their conscious and unconscious processes. They are all unique little individuals. So this means that you're not just a detective, but you're a tailor. So you are tailoring what you learn and your approach to each child individually. Now, you'll know this if you have more than one child, or if your child has friends who come over, or if you work with kids. They're all different, and the same thing doesn't always work all the time with the kids. Okay, so that's the end of this little talk about the parenting iceberg. But if you're after more ideas to support your family and your kids, then I encourage you to check out my Helping Families Thrive cards. You can find out more about them on my website. What you can also find on my website is the free infographic that goes with the cards, and you can download this and have a look at it. It's a great guide to the different aspects of healthy family life. I always say, pay it forward. If you have liked this clip or found it helpful in any way, please share it with your friends, because I'm really keen to help as many parents and carers as I can. And that's it. So if you'd like to stay connected, find out more, see more clips, access more information, you can subscribe to my monthly resource letter. You can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram, and I would love to connect with you in the future. Thank you.